The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the murder for hire of law professor Dan Markel. It's a case about religion, marriage, divorce, custody, and a deadly murder plot that left two boys without a dad. Here's the story. Law professor and devoted father of two, Dan Markel, was involved in a bitter custody battle with his ex-wife, Wendi Adelson. Wendy wanted to move with the kids from Tallahassee, Florida to South Florida to be closer to her mother, Donna, her father, Harvey, and her brother, Charlie. And after Dan Markel was gunned down in his driveway in 2014, that's exactly what she did. Investigators were able to track down the gunman, Latin King gang member Luis Rivera, and his friend Sigfredo Garcia. But why did these men kill Dan Markel? Investigators would come to find a connection. Sigfredo Garcia's longtime girlfriend, Catherine McBanoa, had once dated Wendi Adelson's brother, Charlie. And after the murders, Catherine was collecting cash, checks, and gifts from Charlie. Authorities determined this was a murder for hire orchestrated by Charlie Adelson. After wiretaps, undercover operations, and a murder trial, Charlie Adelson has now joined Catherine McBanoa, Sigfredo Garcia, and Luis Rivera behind bars. And now, in the next twist, Donna Adelson, Dan's former mother-in-law, has been arrested and charged with orchestrating this murder for hire. A couple of things about this case that you have to remember. This murder goes back to 2014. All the way back to 2014. It's had a long procedural history. And I want to go through that history so you understand who got charged, when they get charged, etc., to kind of give us some perspective here. July 12th, 2014, that's when Dan Markel was shot and killed in his driveway. June 17th, 2016, 2 years later, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera were indicted on first-degree murder charges, the hitmen. On October 4th, 2016, Luis Rivera pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in agreement with the state. Then, November 30th of 2016, Catherine McBanoa was indicted for murder. Move ahead another 3 years. May of 2019, the trial of Catherine McBanoa and Sigfredo Garcia begins. The jury finds Garcia guilty, but they could not reach a unanimous verdict for Catherine McBanoa. April 2022, Charlie Adelson is arrested and charged with conspiracy, murder, and solicitation of murder. May 26th, 2022, Catherine McBanoa found guilty of murder at a retrial. November 6th of 2023, Charlie Adelson was found guilty of all charges. November 13th, 2023, all these years later, almost 10 years later, Donna Adelson is arrested. November 15th, Donna Adelson indicted on first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder charges. So take a look here. We break it all down. Luis Rivera has been convicted. Sigfredo Garcia has been convicted. Catherine McBanoa has been convicted. Charlie Adelson has been convicted, and Donna Adelson is awaiting her trial. Which brings me to the first question of our investigation. Should Wendy be worried? Wendi Adelson, who's testified in 3 trials already with some limited immunity, should she now be worried? Her brother, her mother, both been charged. Joining me to help us work through all of this, host of the Surviving the Survivor podcast, Joel Wallman is with us, and criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor. Noah Pines is with us as well. Great to see you both. Joel, I'll begin with you as we look at the way this has all evolved through the years. We're more than 10 years into this thing, and nothing has happened to Wendi Adelson.
Yeah, I mean, I have to tell you, that is the most asked question on my podcast, bar none. Is Wendy next? And the answer is no one really knows. I can tell you that I spent time over the holidays with Ruth Markel, of course, it's Dan Markel's mother, and I spoke with Phil Markel, Dan's father. And look, you know, they talk about justice delayed is justice denied. It came up on our show this evening. We did a story about the latest news with Charlie Adelson. But I can tell you that people want Wendy to pay for this crime. They believe she's behind it. They believe she instigated it. The issue, of course, is the evidence. Is there enough? Some people say there's enough circumstantial evidence. A lot of criminal defense lawyers I talk to say not so fast.
And let me ask you, Joel, just a follow-up on that. Do you have any information that she is worried, that she is concerned, that she's doing things in her life to prepare for potentially being charged? Do we know any of that?
Yeah, just through happenstance, I happen to moved to Miami Beach, so I know people in her inner circle. The short answer is yes. I mean, there's not a day that goes by where she is not looking over her shoulder. She's reportedly moved to Austin, Texas. That has been corroborated. So, the feds are probably on alert because she's inching closer to the southern border there. They caught Donna on the tarmac, the jetway, basically while she was trying to flee to Vietnam via Dubai with a one-way ticket, which I still don't understand. But the short answer is yes. Wendy is worried, and she has every reason to be worried, and I'll tell you why. Georgia Kappelman, who was just named Assistant District Attorney of the Year, who's prosecuted all these cases, is not a fan of hers, and she's competitive, Georgia, and I think she wants Wendy.
All right, Noah Pines, you've been on both sides of this, right? You're a former prosecutor. You're an incredible defense attorney. You were a great prosecutor for years as well.
Thanks,
looking at this case, right? I mean, it's very unusual the way it's progressed through the years. Now, the prosecutor's been extremely successful in getting these guilty verdicts along the way. But first the hitman, then it took a while to get the middle person, then finally Charlie, then Donna. What are your thoughts about Wendy? Should Wendy be worried?
Well, a couple things, Vinny. You're right. I mean, it's 10 years in the making, and you don't typically see that in criminal cases. There is a circumstantial case against Wendy, but that circumstantial case hasn't gotten any better over the years. So in my opinion, unless there's some really hard direct evidence, some new evidence that's proof of her involvement, the case hasn't gotten any better. And Vinny, the longer cases go, the worse they get for prosecutors. So
let me follow up with you on that, though. Let me follow up with you on that, because they've used her with her limited immunity that she's gotten to prosecute Catherine McBanoa, Sigfredo Garcia, Charlie Adelson. Do you think that they're just waiting to use her again, and then once they get everyone that they can help get with her help, then they go after her? Is that a potential strategy by prosecutors in all this?
I mean, I don't see that in this case. I mean, if you're going to go after her, you're going to go after her early. You're not going to wait until the end, in my opinion, because, the case will lose steam, obviously, over time, both for the sympathy for the victim and just in evidence. A jury might be a little less ready to put the mother of the children in prison than they are the brother, the uncle rather, of the children, or the grandmother, or the killers. So you really have to have something stronger than just circumstantial evidence, in my opinion, in this one.
Let me ask you, Joel, this whole case, and we're looking at these photos now, and obviously the children's faces are blurred, but these are old photos. How old are these children now? And because I think that's could be part of the equation in all of this. Is she there raising the children? Is she not raising the children? How old are they? When are they going to head off to college? What do we know?
The boys are 13 and 14. The names are Ben and Lincoln. By all accounts, they're incredibly smart, which is no surprise because Dan Markel went to Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law, and he's a legal scholar. And Wendi Adelson was also a law school graduate and a graduate of Brandeis University undergrad, which happens to be where I went. So the kids are definitely old enough, and there's been a lot of talk about them. Are they doing Google searches? Are they trying to do they know the extent of what happened? There have been obvious issues with grandparent alienation. Ruth Markel and Phil Markel have had a really difficult time getting to see these kids. But I just wanted to kind of circle back real quick to Noah's point. As far as some new evidence, there were devices seized by the FBI when Donna was arrested on the jetway, at least a couple cell phones and a tablet. And there was also a former friend of Wendy who reached out to prosecutors. We don't know the exact extent of what she had to say, but she did reach out to prosecutors reportedly with information about Wendy. So we all know, and I know no one knows, digital forensics can upend a case very quickly. And if there's anything on those devices, Wendy could be in more trouble than she thinks she is right now.
All right, Noah, is your radar going up now? You think, and you were saying new evidence, so it looks like there's potentially the new evidence that's needed. What are your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, obviously people are stupid, and they, as we know from Charlie and Donna's texts between each other, they say stuff that they're not supposed to. And, if there is some digital forensic evidence, that would be enough. Of course, Wendy could just take the contempt and not agree to testify, even though she's been given immunity. What's going to happen? She'll be put in jail until the trial's over. That's always a possibility. We saw that in the Young Thug trial, YSL trial in Georgia, where one witness was like, I'm not going to testify, and was held in contempt and then decided to testify. So it looks like she's cooperating. So if she continues to cooperate, maybe she's not as worried as we think.
All right, we shall see. To me, it's a big part of this because she is the one that benefited from all of this. Noah Pines, great to see you tonight. Joel's going to stick with us. Coming up next, why did Wendy mention Charlie to the police?
It was always this joke. He said, I looked into hiring a hitman and it was cheaper to get you this TV, so instead I got you this TV.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
Somebody tried to kill my ex-husband. They should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law.
Regardless of who it is.
I mean, it would be different if I thought it were my brother, but I don't think it was my family. Anyone outside my immediate family, that's a tough one. Okay. But I don't think my immediate family did this, so.
Strange, right? Reaction to that question by Wendi Adelson? Like, this is the day that Dan is murdered. And she's answered, anyone should be, to the fullest extent, except my family. But they didn't do it. Bizarre statement. Really strange. That wasn't the only strange statement made by Wendi Adelson when she's first being interviewed by police as they begin the investigation into the murder of her ex-husband, who, as we all know, is in the middle of a custody battle with her. Take a listen to more of that interview with police, in this part specifically talking about her brother, Charlie.
Would you ever ask someone to do something like this?
Not in a million years.
Okay. Do you think someone would do this for your benefit without asking you?
No.
What good does it serve?
I mean, my brother, the one, his name's Charlie, the one I'm really close to, he makes a lot of jokes in bad taste, and it was a joke he made. He bought the TV for me this morning that got broken, and I was talking to him about whether it made sense to pay to fix it or whether I should get a new one, and it was always his joke that, like, he knew Danny treated me badly, and it was always this joke. He said, I looked into hiring a hitman and it was cheaper to get you this TV, so instead I got you this TV. Okay. I mean, he would never.
Do you understand that? Do you understand that? Like, this is the day. This is the first interview. This is the first things that investigators are learning, and she's making statements like that. Which brings me to my next question in our investigation. Why did Wendy mention Charlie to police? Like, why did she volunteer that information? What's behind it? Still with us, podcaster, Surviving the Survivor, Joel Waldman. And joining us, clinical and forensic neuropsychologist, author of the book, The New Rules of Attachment, Dr. Judy Ho. I'm almost speechless because I've heard that many, many times, but Joel, just listening to it again, it's so awkward. Like, from your perspective, what do you think, Joel? Why did she mention and volunteer and just put Charlie out there right from the beginning of this investigation?
Well, I'll tell you this. I'm just a journalist, Vinnie, not a lawyer. I'm not a psychologist, but I am the son of a psychiatrist and a licensed social worker, and therefore, by default, I'm a pretty good observer of human nature. And I'm with you 1,000%. And not to make light of it, but when you're incredulous, I was kind of laughing because it just is off. It's completely bizarre behavior. The day you find out the person you were once married to is murdered in a driveway. They appear to be, some of the time crocodile tears, bad acting job. And then to invoke your own family to suggest that, well, they didn't have any part in this. Like, where does that come from? And then to take it a step further and say, my brother made this joke about hiring a hitman is more expensive than repairing a TV. First of all, no one repairs TVs anymore. You don't go to Best Buy if you just buy a new television. And that was the case, I think, back then as well. But it's just difficult to listen to. And honestly, I think this is the sort of thing that jurors would read right through.
Dr. Judy Ho, what's going on here? Why is she mentioning Charlie to police? And, but he wouldn't do it. He definitely wouldn't do it. He definitely wouldn't hire a hitman.
I know, Vinny. She's all over the place. The first thing she says is nobody in my family could have anything to do with this. But I think there's a possibility that she knew she was a person of interest, as spouses and partners often are in these cases. And she wanted to deflect attention off of herself. So she mentions Charlie, but then it sounds like she changed her mind again. She said, well, he would never, before that video cut off. And this is supposedly this brother that she's super close to. He's so protective of her, et cetera, et cetera. And here she is possibly throwing him under the bus. And as Joel just mentioned, I think the jury's not going to take kindly to this observation. She seems, again, one read on this is that she's extremely selfish and she's just trying to get out of trouble.
It's one thing if she just kind of throws the thing out there about the hitman, but we all know that he was murdered by a hitman, Dr. Judy Ho. I'm trying. I can't come up with an innocent explanation for that. I just can't. Do you think she's pointing the finger, or is she? Again, I've never had my tongue tied this much as I have in this segment right now, trying to understand this.
I think it's possible that she got flustered in the moment and she knew that all of the attention was on her. I mean, you can see how the questioning was going because the detective was saying, well, could somebody have done this on your behalf because they know how unhappy you were, how much you hated your spouse, et cetera, right? So she kind of knew where this question was going. Eventually, all paths lead to her. And maybe in the moment, even though she so dearly loves her brother, supposedly, she just thought, hey, I'm just going to throw this out there because then the attention won't be on me completely. And then it sounds like she might have regretted it because then she started to say, well, no, and she tried to cover it up, but you already put it out there. And as you said, Vinny, we know that he was killed by a hitman, so it's just a little too on the nose.
Yeah, Joel, this is right out of the box. This is day one, interview one. That's the part of it that, if it eventually sort of ekes out or leaks out, like, oh, yeah, he used to make jokes about this, or someone heard a joke. But she is just, like, in a silver platter, handing it to investigators. Here's where you guys need to look.
Yeah, obviously, we've all heard and listened to a lot of 911 calls where you right away. I'm thinking of one in particular. I'm not going to say it out loud, where I just simply don't believe the caller. It's a case that we've been covering really closely. What's interesting about Wendy's interview with police, and as you said, Vinnie, right out of the gates, is she also later in the interview then gives possible reasons for why Dan was murdered, including the fact that people in the law didn't like him. Maybe he was burglarized. So she's providing to police possible other avenues for why this crime happened. It's not something you can ask the doctor about this, that most innocent people would do. I mean, if it was me, I'd be asking a lot of questions. How are they doing? Are they going to make it? Are they going to survive? Because he didn't die for about 9 hours, 10 hours later. She's just in this moment kind of CYA-ing, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, Dr. Judy Ho, it's like, well, maybe someone over here did it, maybe someone over here, but my family, they definitely wouldn't do it.
Right. But she is giving all of these reasons for why somebody would want to kill him. Like, hey, you know what? He had a lot of enemies. There was a lot of problems here. Again, almost justifying it before knowing the final outcome. I mean, this is what's so sad is when you think about how somebody might react in a scenario like this, you're not going to go right to all the reasons why somebody might want to kill somebody that you once loved and parent children with. Like, that's just not a usual first reaction. And so I think that when you're thinking from a common sense, logical place, you're going to say, this doesn't make any sense at all. Like, she's happy that he's gone.
Dr. Judy Ho, thanks so much for your insight and expertise. Coming up, where was Wendy on the day of the murder? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the murder for hire of Dan Markel. The hitmen have confessed. 3 others have been convicted, but now the former mother-in-law of Dan Markel has been charged with pulling all the strings. Here's the story. Charlie Adelson's sister Wendy was going through a bitter custody battle with her ex, law professor Dan Markel, and she wanted her children to move from Tallahassee to South Florida, closer to her family. Charlie convinced his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Catherine McBanoa, to get her ex, Sigfredo Garcia, to murder Dan. Sigfredo, with the help of his Latin King buddy Luis Rivera, drove over 400 miles from South Florida to Tallahassee to murder Dan. Charlie was convicted at trial, so were Sigfredo and Catherine. Luis pleaded guilty. And now, Wendy's mother, Donna Adelson, is getting ready for her trial, also charged with being a part of this murder-for-hire plot that left her grandchildren without a father. So Wendi Adelson, Dan's ex, is the one in this custody battle, and we've heard a lot from her, telling her story of what was going on, her reaction when she is told that Dan has been shot. Take a listen here as Wendi Adelson talks about the day Dan was murdered.
Where did you go after the TV repair man left?
After he left, I stayed at the house for a while, and I was working on some pieces of writing. I was talking with various friends. I had a friend in town interviewing for a job at FSU. I was making plans to go meet her. The time got too close before her interview. And then I had 2 friends that I would often meet on Fridays, just kind of last minute. And so we made plans to go have lunch.
All right, so what time did you leave the house to go have lunch?
I really didn't remember offhand, but I refreshed my memory and saw it was sometime around 12:45.
Okay, so it makes sense that you might have left your residence at about 12:30?
Sure.
Okay, and did you go to the crime scene or very near the crime scene on your way from your residence to, I guess, to lunch or to wherever you were going next?
No, I did not.
So you never turned on Trescott Drive that day?
I went to turn on Trescott Drive, but I saw that it had been blocked off by some tape, and so I just kept driving on Centerville.
Interesting that she seemed to drive past the street and it was blocked off. This was a murder for hire. That is super clear, right? The one hitman confessed, the other was convicted at trial. We know about Charlie Adelson, his role in all of this. But I've got another question that we need to ask tonight in this investigation. It's about Wendy. Where was Wendy on the day of the murder? She's taking this drive. There's a TV repairman. Need to fill in some of the details here. And joining me, host of the Survivor podcast, Joel Waldman, and a man who served as trial counsel for Dan Markel in his divorce proceedings, Stephen Webster, is with us as well. Great to have you both here. Before we get into it, I want to show everyone one more thing. Julia Janae, Court TV anchor, also was down there and took a look at what Wendi Adelson may have or could have seen that day.
What did Wendi Adelson see when she almost drove by a crime scene on July 18th of 2014? We're on Trescott Drive, where Dan Markel lived, and on the day that he was murdered, his ex-wife testified that she took this very street on her way to a liquor store before she was notified he'd been killed. Prosecutors allege that if she had no involvement, then the police cars and roadblock and crime scene tape on this street should have raised her alarm.
When you drove to ABC Liquor, you tried to go through Trescott. Is that fair to say?
It was blocked.
There are other ways to go to ABC Liquor, right? You could have gone down other roads.
I don't have the best sense of direction, so when I find a route, I just kind of keep using that route.
We retraced Wendy's route that day. She would have been coming from Centerville Road, a more commercial street, and she left Centerville to pass through Benton Hills on Trescott Drive, a much more residential road with several caution signs. Then it takes us another 2.5 minutes after leaving Centerville Road to get close to Markel's home on Trescott. Wendy testified to something different. She said she barely made it onto Trescott before she saw police.
I went to turn on Trescott Drive, but I saw that it had been blocked off by some tape, and so I just kept driving on Centerville. There was tape.
Yeah, and an officer was there.
I didn't see an officer, but I did see a car.
A law enforcement marked vehicle.
This is around where that police roadblock would have been, according to the officer on the scene's testimony. Wendy claimed she couldn't see what was happening at Markel's house from her car. It's the one you see there with the brick mailbox. It's about 2 houses from that speed hump sign. And the road winds out to where it's more visible to see that mailbox, but you can't make out exactly because of the trees, the actual house building.
Basically, the investigators and the crime scene techs taking care of their portion. And the crime scene tech vehicles are marked police and have lights on them and stuff.
Would it have been obvious to someone approaching your position in a vehicle that there was activity, law enforcement activity going on at that residence?
It seems likely.
If the roadblock was set up where Officer Bill Brandon recalled, between 3 and 6 houses away from the scene, it appears emergency vehicles parked along this narrow road would have been visible and obvious to drivers, but the car where Markel was ambushed, it would have been out of sight.
I just assumed it was weather or maybe a tree fell.
Did you attempt to call Dan Markel when you encountered the roadblock?
No, I didn't think anything of it.
After Wendi Adelson was turned around at this location, she completed her stop at the store and then went to lunch with friends. It's there that an investigator interrupted that lunch to let her know the tragic news of her ex-husband's shooting.
One of those strange facts in all this. Joel Waldman, let me begin with you on what Wendy was doing the day of the murder. I think a big part of it is, who was she talking to? Who was she communicating with? And then you've got this drive to the liquor store that seems to go in the direction of the crime scene.
Yeah, Vinny, I got to say, taking a trip down memory lane here with you tonight, and you know, usually you look at it sort of piecemeal, but in its totality, the more I see on your show this evening, the more I think that Georgia Cappleman is going to go after Wendi Adelson, because it makes absolutely no sense. And Stephen Webster, who's a friend of mine and just a great guy, he lives in Tallahassee. I made this drive myself. I did what Julia did, and it makes zero sense. You combine that with the fact that she claims a TV set was broken and she had to have the Geek Squad come over at a certain time, basically exactly when Dan Markel was being murdered. It's all too convenient. And why in the world would she go out of her way and then assume that a quote-unquote tree fell? It just doesn't add up.
Stephen Webster, what are your thoughts about Wendi Adelson and her activities that day, the day that Dan was shot and killed by the hitman?
I think it's indicative of guilt. There is no reason for her to have taken such a circuitous route to go to any liquor store. But at that time, that ABC liquor store wasn't the nicest liquor store in town by a long shot. It's since been remodeled, and it's a very nice store now. But back then, it's probably the last place that I would expect Wendi Adelson to go to begin with. And so to go way out of her way, all of her varying accounts about how she went down Trescott or didn't go down Trescott, the fact that she was recorded by the perimeter officer as having pulled up, or at least a minivan that I think she pretty much admits now was her. Yeah, it's all indicative of guilt to me.
So, Stephen, looking at the big picture here in this custody battle that prosecutors have demonstrated as a motive for the murder here, was this, from your perspective, Dan Markel versus Wendi, or was this Dan Markel versus the Adelsons?
No, you nailed it right there. It was Dan Markel versus the Adelsons. And honestly, it was my impression that Donna was driving the train as much as anybody. Like, looking back on it now, in retrospect, I do think that Wendi was very savvy, and maybe the most savvy of all, kind of going back to your prior segment where she threw her brother's name out there just kind of out of the blue, and gratuitously, in my opinion, to set up a patsy. But there's no doubt that this was bigger than just Wendi. Donna said, nobody beats the Adelsons, and she meant it.
Joel, as you look at everything that happened that day and how Wendi is reacting that day as well, right? Because she is interrupted at that luncheon. So she's constantly seemingly having some level of an alibi all along the way, right? That's number one. And then the way that she's acting and reacting to everything. What are your thoughts about her actions that day?
Very simply, it's as if she knew. Again, things just don't add up. Is it all coincidence? I don't think so. I mean, you've got this, the Geek Squad from Best Buy, the drive down Trescott, which, by the way, as Webster just said, I think that was corroborated by a Tallahassee police officer who saw her in that car. So she was, in fact, there and basically admits to it during testimony. And then she's conveniently at this lunch. Again, no reason to go to that ABC liquor store. Too many coincidences in a row is a problem, and I think this is a problem for Wendi. And again, when we started the show tonight, Vinny, I'm thinking, yeah, maybe as I, again, go back down this memory lane here, this trip down memory lane, I think Wendi's time is coming, and I think it's going to be coming sooner than most people think. I know it's a bold statement. I think Stephen is one of the people that does agree with me, but there are criminal defense attorneys who say the evidence is too circumstantial. But in Tallahassee, they know what's up.
All right. Big thanks to Joel Waldman, Surviving the Survivor, and Stephen Webster. We'll be talking about this many, many more times as we get closer to the next trial. Still to come, what is the status of Wendi and Donna's relationship?
But we just got off the phone with him, and the first thing he asked was, how's Wendi holding up? I didn't have the heart to tell him that you never called up or asked about him. I just said we weren't up to phone calls right now. Everyone looks to protect you. I bet you've got a lot to think about.
The Court TV Podcast will return.
When was the last time you talked to your mom? Did you talk to her today, yesterday?
I talked to her yesterday.
In her emails, and we referenced one of them while you've been here on the stand, she talks about you giving performances and playing roles. Did you discuss anything about what you would do here today in court with your mother?
No.
That was an interesting moment. But it seems pretty clear that Donna and Wendy, mother-daughter, were speaking, had a relationship. And based upon the fact of this case and the prosecution's theory, seems Donna cared a lot about her daughter and cared a lot about her grandchildren. But a lot has happened since then, including Wendy testifying in Charlie's trial and helping prosecutors convict Charlie. Now, she had an immunity situation and was compelled to testify, but nonetheless, her testimony helped convict her brother, which brings us to our next question in our investigation. Mother-daughter here. What is the status of Wendy and Donna's relationship at this point, right now? Like, what is the status of that relationship? Joining me, a man who says he's known the Adelsons for 40 years, who lived in the same community, former Florida state lawmaker and mayor, Dr. Ben Graber is with us, and also with us, clinical and forensic neuropsychologist, author of the book, The New Rules of Attachment, Dr. Judy Ho. Great to have you both here. I just want to play one more recording. This was a phone call after Charlie's conviction, before Donna is arrested. They're speaking on the phone, it's being recorded. Then Charlie sort of disappears in the conversation, and you just hear what's happening on Donna's end of the call. Let's take a listen.
So I wrote this last night. We know you never ask anything about your brother. This is 8 o'clock last night. But we just got off the phone with him, and the first thing he asked was, how's Wendy holding up? I didn't have the heart to tell him that you never called us or asked about him. I just said we weren't up to phone calls right now. Everyone looks to protect you. I bet you've got a lot to think about. But then she didn't answer. But then I got another call from Charlie last night, and I said, just got off the phone with Charlie. He's worried about you. He wants to know why we didn't speak. I told him a lie. I said, we're only speaking with you and Dan right now. I couldn't bear to tell him the truth. Your sister never even called us, is the truth. So she says this morning, I thought she'd be racing over here last night. Yeah. Dear Mom, I know you are upset by the verdict, but the anger directed at me is not justified. I don't know how much anger. We don't. I'm not responsible in any way for Charlie's situation. I am not guilty because I did not do anything wrong, and I was not involved in any way with Danny's death. Here she was. When I was interviewed by the police and testified in court, I told the truth, as I was required to do. I cannot control how the prosecutor used my statements at Charlie's trial. Again, I didn't say that. Also, as you know, my lawyer has advised me not to talk to my family or anyone else about this case. Now, about the case, which is true, we've never done it. I followed his advice despite your disagreements with this guidance. Please do not text me about this case anymore. Not about the case, is it? Not what I said. About her brother, and that he wants, how are you, Wendy? How's my sister holding up? Yeah. If you have anything further to say about the case, please go through our lawyers. Right now, I have to be singularly focused on taking care of the boys during this difficult time.
Okay, that's a lot there. Dr. Ben Graber, knowing the Adelsons, knowing Donna and the family, what's your take here on the status of Wendy and Donna's relationship?
Well, they have the typical mother-daughter Jewish, which is based on guilt. And when the daughter fails to do something the mother thinks is appropriate, she's going to make her feel guilty. And that's the typical type of scenario you hear, where she's working on her daughter's guilt, using the fact that her brother just went through a lot. You didn't call us. We're worried. We're upset. We're going through a lot of stress. How could you not call us? How could you not be with us? In other words, it doesn't really have to do with the case. It has to do with their relationship, which is normally a family relationship the way I've always known them. And the case, however, as you can see, they don't really believe this case is real. They're living in a little delusion here. Wendy understands it's real. And from what I could see, watching her body language, watching the way she behaves, the way she thinks about it, the kind of responses she makes, she's trying very hard to be as honest as she could be, also considering the fact that her family has been targeted in all of this. But I see her saying everything perfectly honestly. She said, if I don't tell the truth now, it's going to come out later. They're going to think I lied. So I'm going to tell you everything I know. And she did, even in that first interview with the policeman. To blurt out, her brother told her a joke that she knows very well could imply something to the police. She's just being honest. And the truth of the matter is, I don't believe she was aware of anything going on. Now, what's really going on here is you got 3 killers in jail. You got the brother who they convinced paid for it. He's in jail. And now they're going after the mother, the father, the daughter, and then, of course, the 2 grandchildren are going to suffer the most from all of this. It's a vendetta. It's ridiculous. For them to do this, I wrote a piece comparing this to one of the worst vendettas in American history after the Civil War, and that's the feud that occurred between the Hatfields and the McCoys. That feud was very similar. Prominent families, different states after the Civil War, intermarriage between the daughter and son, and fights occurred, killing. It was very similar. It went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yep.
Okay.
Doctor, let me just do this, Doctor. I just want to get Dr. Judy Ho in real quick before we run out of time, and get her thoughts on this mother-daughter relationship and evaluate the status of it.
Well, Vinnie, it's clear that Donna feels betrayed, like Wendy just left the family, essentially. Those are her sentiments. You can tell she's really upset about it. And essentially, as she's reading this letter from Wendy, she's making all these side comments of, how could she do this? She doesn't even care about her brother, the person that she says she's so close with on that first police interview. I think this is a broken-hearted mother. I mean, regardless of what has happened, I think that Donna expected Wendy to stay close to the family first, and she's saying, hey, we're all trying to protect you and you've just abandoned us. So I think that there's a lot of resentment there, possibly.
Dr. Judy Ho, thank you so much. Dr. Ben Graber, always great to have your perspective. We appreciate it. Wendi Adelson's relationship with her mother and brother, those relationships are complicated, but without her statements to police and her testimony at trial, the case against both would be much weaker. The irony is that the person who benefited the most from Dan's murder still has not been charged. This is really a very bizarre situation. But remember, there's no statute of limitations for murder. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for the answers as the investigation continues. There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.